The warm morning sun shone gently over the calm blue water of Lake Pine. Birds sang from the tall trees that stood proudly around the neighborhood. It was a peaceful place, at least to anyone who came for the first time. The houses by the lake looked neat, the gardens trimmed, and the pathways swept clean. But not everything was as perfect as it seemed. Daniel, a quiet and polite man in his early 30s, had just arrived at the neighborhood with his small moving truck. He was excited, not just because of the view but because he had worked hard for years to finally buy a little house by the water. It wasn't a big home, but it was his dream place, a spot where he could fish in the morning, drink tea on the porch, and breathe in fresh air away from the city noise. Daniel parked his truck near the driveway and took a deep breath. Finally, he whispered to himself, smiling. He had no idea that the calm lake would soon bring him face to face with a storm not of weather, but of people. As he carried the first box to the porch, he noticed a woman walking quickly across the street toward him. She wore dark sunglasses, a neat blouse, and carried a clipboard tightly against her chest as if it were a shield. Her steps were firm, her face serious, and she didn't bother with a smile. This was Karen, the head of the Lake Pine Homeowners Association, known by everyone simply as the HOA. "Excuse me." Karen's voice was sharp. "What do you think you're doing?" Daniel set down the box carefully and turned. "Good morning." "I'm moving in," he replied in his calm tone. Karen tilted her head, adjusting her glasses. "Moving in? Into which house?" Daniel pointed at the small but pretty home with the green shutters. "That one. Number 14. Karen's lips pressed tightly. "Impossible. Number 14 is part of our HOA. We have strict rules here. You can't just move in without approval." Daniel raised an eyebrow, still polite. "I bought the house last week. The papers are signed. Everything is legal." Karen shook her head as though his words were unimportant. "Oh no, no, no. You don't understand. Around here, people must first come through me. I lead the HOA, and I make sure this neighborhood stays, well, proper. We don't just let anyone in." Her tone carried a mix of pride and suspicion, as if she were the queen of the lake. Daniel tried to stay kind. "I see. But the owner sold it to me directly. I'm just moving in, that's all. I don't mean to cause trouble." Karen's eyes narrowed. "Trouble? We'll see about that. You may have papers, but I won't allow this. People must follow the rules of the lake. And rule number 1 is respect for the HOA." Daniel gave a soft sigh. He didn't want a fight. After all, it was his first day. So he simply nodded and went back to lifting another box. But Karen didn't move. She stood right there on the driveway, staring at him as though guarding her territory. Finally, she said, "If you don't stop this right now, I'll call the police. You can't move in until I approve you." Daniel placed the box on the porch, looked at her, and answered slowly, "Ma'am, I'm not breaking any law. I'm just moving into my house. You're free to call whoever you like." Karen gasped as if insulted. "So you refuse to listen? Fine." She pulled out her phone with dramatic speed. "Let's see what the police have to say about this." The call was quick, and her words were sharp, almost rehearsed. "Hello? Yes, I need officers at Lake Pine Drive, number 14. There's a man trespassing, claiming he owns a house here. Please come fast." Daniel shook his head quietly. He had expected peace, not drama. Still, he didn't panic. He sat on the porch step and waited, watching the calm water of the lake sparkle under the sun. A few neighbors peeked through their curtains. A man walking his dog stopped at the corner, whispering to another. Clearly, this wasn't the first time Karen had created a scene. But for Daniel, it was a new and strange welcome. Minutes later, the sound of sirens grew closer. A police car turned into the street, parking just in front of the house. Two officers stepped out, adjusting their belts, ready to respond. Karen waved at them eagerly, almost like someone greeting friends she had invited. "Officers! Over here," she called loudly, pointing toward Daniel. "That's him. He's trespassing and refusing to leave. This is a private HOA community." The officers walked up slowly, glancing at Daniel, who stood politely on his porch. His calmness surprised them. Most trespassers, they thought, would look nervous or guilty. But Daniel was neither. One officer asked gently, "Sir, may we know what's going on here?" Karen jumped in before Daniel could speak. "He's not allowed here. This neighborhood is managed by our HOA, and he refuses to move. He doesn't belong to this lake community." The officers turned to Daniel. He finally stood, dusted his hands, and smiled politely. "Good morning, officers. My name is Daniel. I bought this house last week. All papers are signed and registered. I'm just moving in." The officers exchanged looks. Something about Daniel's voice was steady, confident, and respectful. They had met people who lied, and people who panicked. Daniel was neither. Then, slowly, Daniel reached into his pocket, pulled out a leather badge case, and opened it. The sunlight caught the golden shield inside. Karen's mouth fell open. The officers straightened at once. Daniel's calm voice grew even clearer, "I'm with the state police. And this is my house." The street went silent. For a long moment, silence hung in the air like a heavy cloud. The shiny badge in Daniel's hand seemed brighter than the morning sun. The officers stood with respect, and even the neighbors watching from their windows froze. Karen's mouth moved, but no words came out. She had been ready to see the police drag Daniel away, but instead, her own plan had turned upside down. Daniel slipped the badge back into his pocket and spoke calmly. "I wasn't planning to show this. I wanted to just move in like any normal person. But since I was accused of trespassing, I thought it was fair to be clear." One of the officers, a tall man with kind eyes, nodded. "That explains a lot, sir. Do you have the purchase papers as well?" Daniel walked to his truck, opened a folder, and handed over the signed documents. The officer scanned them carefully, then gave a small smile. "Everything seems in order. This is indeed his property." Karen's face turned red. But the HOA," the second officer gently interrupted. "Ma'am, the HOA has rules, yes, but it does not overrule property law. If this gentleman owns the house legally, he has every right to be here." Karen looked around as if searching for support. The man walking his dog quietly turned away. Curtains that had been pulled back quickly slid shut. Nobody wanted to stand beside her now. Daniel, still calm, carried another box to the porch. His movements were steady, not angry. He simply acted like a man who knew the truth didn't need shouting. Karen folded her arms tightly, her voice trembling. I was only trying to protect the community. We have high standards here. We can't just let anyone." Daniel stopped and looked directly at her, not unkindly but firmly. "Anyone? I worked for years to afford this home. I didn't come here to cause problems. I came here for peace. Respect works both ways. The officers exchanged another glance. One of them cleared his throat. Everything is clear here. Ma'am, please understand this man is not a trespasser. He is your new neighbor. They tipped their caps to Daniel politely before walking back to their car. The sound of the police vehicle driving away left the street strangely quiet again. Karen stood frozen, her clipboard clutched in her hands. For the first time in years, she had lost control of a situation. She was used to being the voice everyone feared, the one who gave orders and received obedience. But Daniel had not shouted, argued, or panicked. He had simply shown truth. Daniel, however, didn't celebrate. He continued moving boxes inside, humming softly as though nothing had happened. His peace was his answer. Later that afternoon, a gentle knock came on his door. Daniel opened it to find a short, elderly woman smiling kindly. She carried a plate of fresh cookies. "Hello, dear," she said softly. "I'm Mrs. Lee from across the street. Welcome to Lake Pine." Daniel's serious face softened into a smile. "Thank you, ma'am. That's very kind of you." Mrs. Lee leaned closer and whispered, "Don't worry too much about Karen. She's always been strong-headed. But not everyone here thinks like her. You'll find good neighbors too." Daniel chuckled quietly. "I'll remember that. And thank you again for the warm welcome." As she walked back across the street, Daniel felt a little lighter. Maybe the lake had storms, but it also had gentle breezes. That evening, as the golden sky reflected on the calm water, Daniel sat on his porch with a cup of tea. His body was tired from moving, but his heart was steady. He thought about the events of the day. He hadn't wanted to use his badge. To him, the badge was not for pride but for duty, a symbol of service, not of personal power. But sometimes, truth needed to be shown plainly. Across the street, Karen stood at her window, watching him. Her pride had taken a deep hit, yet inside her chest, something else stirred. She had expected Daniel to be arrogant after revealing his position, maybe even to throw his authority in her face. Instead, he had remained calm, gentle, and respectful. Karen pressed her lips together, unsettled. She was used to people either fearing her or arguing with her. Daniel had done neither. The next morning, Daniel woke early. He put on simple clothes and went for a walk by the lake. The water sparkled softly, ducks swam near the shore, and the fresh air filled his lungs. He felt thankful for this new beginning. As he walked back, he noticed a few neighbors waving shyly. A man mowing his lawn lifted a hand. A young mother pushing a stroller smiled. Daniel waved back warmly. But Karen was outside too, trimming her roses with sharp movements. When she saw Daniel approaching, her shoulders stiffened. She wanted to turn away, but something inside her wouldn't allow it. She stood, waiting, her pride still heavy but mixed with something else, curiosity. "Good morning," Daniel said politely as he passed. Karen hesitated, then muttered, "Morning." Her voice was quieter than before, almost unsure. Daniel gave a small nod and kept walking. He didn't push, didn't argue. He left her with her thoughts. That day, Karen found herself restless. She replayed the scene again and again, the police, the neighbors, the badge. But what bothered her most wasn't the badge. It was Daniel's calmness, his refusal to meet her anger with anger. It unsettled her more than anything else. For the first time in years, Karen wondered if she had been wrong. Days passed quietly at Lake Pine, yet the memory of Daniel's first morning lingered in everyone's mind. The scene of Karen calling the police, only to be humbled by the truth, had spread like whispers on the wind. Neighbors talked in soft tones over fences, during evening walks, or while picking up mail. Some laughed kindly at the thought of Karen being outsmarted. Others simply nodded, grateful that someone had finally stood firm against her endless rules. Daniel, however, did not involve himself in gossip. He woke early each day, jogged by the lake, and spent hours arranging his new home. His porch grew more welcoming as he placed flowers by the steps and a wind chime near the door. Slowly, his little green-shuttered house began to feel alive. Karen, on the other hand, felt a storm inside her chest. Every time she passed Daniel's home, she remembered the police officers standing respectfully in front of him. She had lived at Lake Pine for 15 years, ruling the HOA like a captain steering her ship. People followed her orders, even when they grumbled in private. Yet this man, quiet, polite, and steady, had not bent. And worse, he had not even fought. He had shown the truth so calmly that it made her anger look childish. One afternoon, Karen sat at her dining table, flipping through the HOA rulebook she had written years ago. No loud music after 9, no boats left on the shore overnight, gardens must be kept neat. Her eyes fell on each line, but her heart was not on the words. Instead, she kept thinking about Daniel watering his plants, greeting neighbors, and waving to children who played near the street. Her teenage son, Aaron, noticed her sighing. "Mom, are you okay?" Karen quickly straightened. "Of course. Why do you ask?" Aaron shrugged. "You've been staring at that book for hours. And you keep looking at the new guy's house." Karen frowned. "I'm only making sure the community stays proper." But even Aaron smiled knowingly. "He doesn't seem like trouble. He even helped Mrs. Lee carry her groceries yesterday." "I saw it." Karen fell silent. She didn't want to admit it, but she had seen it too. Daniel had lifted the heavy bags as though it was the most natural thing in the world. Mrs. Lee had smiled at him warmly, and other neighbors had noticed. That night, Karen lay awake in her bed, staring at the ceiling. She was used to being respected out of fear. But Daniel was earning respect without even trying. The next morning, Daniel was on his porch fixing a loose step when a young boy on a bicycle stopped nearby. His name was Tommy, the son of a family who lived 2 houses down. "Hi, Mr. Daniel," the boy called. Daniel looked up and smiled. "Morning, Tommy. Out for a ride?" "Yeah," Tommy said, balancing his bike with one foot on the ground. "My chain got stuck earlier. Do you know how to fix bikes?" Daniel chuckled. "I can take a look." "Bring it over." Tommy wheeled his bike to the porch. Daniel wiped his hands, bent down, and with a few quick adjustments, the chain was back in place. "Wow. Thanks." Tommy's face lit up. "You're way better than me at fixing things." Daniel laughed softly. "It just takes practice. You'll get better." Tommy waved and rode off happily. From across the street, Karen had been watering her plants but couldn't help noticing again. Something tugged at her heart, a mix of pride, guilt, and confusion. That afternoon, another knock came at Daniel's door. This time, it was Mr. Howard, a quiet man who lived on the corner. He carried a fishing rod. "I heard you like the lake," Mr. Howard said, clearing his throat. "Would you like to join me tomorrow morning for some fishing? It's a peaceful spot, just beyond the bend. Daniel's face brightened. I'd love that. Thank you for asking. Word spread quickly again. Daniel was making friends. Not with loud charm, not with flashy shows, but with simple kindness. Karen felt the shift in the air. The neighbors were slowly beginning to look to Daniel, not to her. For years, she had been the voice of authority. Now, there was another kind of influence, one built on quiet respect. That evening, as Daniel sat by his porch drinking tea, Karen walked slowly toward his house. She carried no clipboard this time, only her own restless thoughts. She stopped a few steps away, cleared her throat, and spoke. "Mr. Daniel." Daniel looked up politely. "Good evening." Karen's fingers tightened around each other. She wanted to say something sharp, something to take back her pride. But instead, her voice softened. "I wanted to say, perhaps I judged too quickly." Daniel studied her for a moment. His eyes were calm, not mocking. "It happens," he said gently. "First impressions can be tricky." Karen shifted uncomfortably. "I was only trying to protect the neighborhood. I didn't mean to. Well, things went differently than I planned." Daniel nodded. "I understand. But protection should not come from fear. Respect works better when it grows naturally." Those words struck Karen's heart deeper than she expected. She gave a stiff nod, muttered, "Good night," and walked back quickly to her house. Inside, she placed her clipboard on the shelf and stared at it for a long time. For the first time in years, she wondered if she had confused control with care. The summer days at Lake Pine grew brighter as the weeks passed. Neighbors who once kept their distance now found more reasons to be outside. Children rode their bikes freely, couples walked by the water, and soft laughter often drifted across the street. Something about Daniel's quiet presence had brought a lighter spirit to the community. Karen noticed it all. She would stand by her window, pretending to adjust her curtains, and see people gathering around Daniel's porch. Some asked him for advice, some for help, and some simply enjoyed talking with him. What struck Karen most was that he never sought attention. He didn't push himself into the center, yet people naturally drew closer. One morning, Karen walked outside holding her clipboard. It had always been her shield, the object that made her feel in charge. But that day, the clipboard felt heavier than usual. She glanced across the street and saw Daniel sitting on his porch with Mr. Howard, laughing quietly over fishing stories. Karen turned toward her rose bushes, snipping them sharply, but her hands trembled. She thought about the words Daniel had spoken the other evening: protection should not come from fear. Respect works better when it grows naturally. The truth of it stung, but it also stayed with her. Later that week, the HOA held its monthly meeting at the community hall. Karen, as always, stood at the front, ready to guide the discussion. She had expected the usual quiet agreement from her neighbors. But this time, things felt different. Mrs. Lee raised her hand. "I wanted to bring up something. Perhaps instead of more rules about how people should decorate their porches, we could focus on activities that bring us together, like a picnic by the lake." A few heads nodded eagerly. Karen tightened her grip on the clipboard. "Picnics are fine, but structure is important. We must keep standards." Mr. Howard cleared his throat. "Standards are good, Karen. But sometimes people also need kindness and connection. We've all noticed how welcoming Daniel has been. He's already bringing neighbors together." At the sound of Daniel's name, the room grew quiet. Karen felt her chest tighten. For years, her name had been the one spoken most often in these meetings. Now another name had entered the circle. She forced a smile. Yes, yes, of course. But let's not forget who built this community's reputation. People nodded politely, but their eyes told a different story. Karen ended the meeting quickly, her heart heavy. That evening, as she walked home, she saw Daniel fixing a loose board on the fence that separated his yard from Mrs. Lee's. He worked carefully, hammering gently so as not to disturb the quiet evening. When he noticed Karen walking by, he offered a warm nod. "Good evening," he said simply. Karen hesitated, then replied, "Good evening." Her voice was softer than usual. She walked into her house, placed her clipboard on the kitchen counter, and sat alone at the table. She felt something she had not felt in years: uncertainty. The next morning, Aaron sat at the breakfast table scrolling through his phone. "Mom," he said, "people are talking about having a lake cleanup day. They want to ask Daniel to organize it." Karen blinked. "Daniel? But that's usually something I lead." Aaron gave her a gentle smile. "Maybe you could join him instead." The thought startled her. Join him? For years, she had been the leader. She had never shared the role. Yet, as she thought about it, she realized her son was right. If she wanted to keep the respect of the community, maybe it was time to work with others instead of over them. That afternoon, Karen walked slowly across the street. Daniel was trimming his small garden when he looked up and smiled. "Hello, Karen," he said politely. She cleared her throat. "I heard about the cleanup day idea. The neighborhood wants you to lead it?" Daniel chuckled softly. "I didn't know that. I was just planning to help if anyone needed." Karen hesitated. The words felt heavy, but she forced them out. "Maybe we could organize it together." Daniel studied her face for a moment, then nodded kindly. "That sounds like a good plan." Relief washed over Karen, though she didn't show it. For the first time, she felt like she wasn't fighting Daniel, but standing beside him. The following week, flyers went up around the neighborhood announcing Lake Pine Cleanup Day. Both Karen and Daniel's names were written at the bottom as organizers. Neighbors were surprised, even impressed. Some whispered that perhaps Karen was changing. On the day of the event, families gathered by the water with gloves, trash bags, and cheerful smiles. Daniel guided the children, teaching them how to collect waste safely, while Karen directed the adults toward different areas. For once, her voice carried not sharpness, but encouragement. By the afternoon, the lake shore looked cleaner than it had in years. People clapped, laughed, and shared food on picnic blankets. Karen stood watching the scene, her heart strangely warm. She had always wanted the community to look good, but she realized she had missed something more important: the joy of people working together. Daniel walked over, handing her a bottle of water. "You did well today," he said. Karen smiled faintly. "We did well." As the sun set over the shining water, Karen felt a quiet change stirring inside her. For the first time, she wondered if being respected was not about control, but about kindness. The cleanup day had left a new feeling in Lake Pine. Neighbors who once kept to themselves now waved more often, and children laughed freely by the water. For the first time in years, people felt united. Daniel had brought quiet strength, and to everyone's surprise, Karen had begun to soften. But inside Karen, the battle was not over. She had lived so long as the strict leader of the HOA that letting go of control felt like learning to walk again. At night, she still stared at her clipboard, wondering if people respected her less now that she wasn't in charge of everything. One morning, Karen sat on her porch sipping tea. She saw Daniel jogging around the lake, his steady pace calm as always. As he passed, he waved. Karen lifted her hand awkwardly, then lowered it quickly. Her pride still made simple gestures difficult. That afternoon, Aaron came home from school with excitement in his eyes. "Mom, guess what? The school is asking for volunteers to speak about community service. They invited Daniel to come next week." Karen's cup nearly slipped from her hand. "Daniel? At the school?" Aaron nodded. "Yeah, the principal said he's a good example for the kids." "Isn't that cool?" Karen forced a smile. "Very cool," she said softly, but inside her chest, jealousy stirred. For years, she had been the voice of order in the neighborhood, yet now Daniel was the one being invited to speak. That evening, as the sun set behind the tall trees, Karen walked slowly along the lake. She watched the reflection of the golden light on the water and thought about her life at Lake Pine. She had built her role on rules, on being the one who decided everything. But what had it given her? Respect mixed with fear, yes. But had it given her true friendship? Had it given her joy? The next day, Karen was given an unexpected test. It was a windy afternoon, and branches from one of the older trees near the lake had fallen across the pathway. A group of children on bicycles stopped, unsure how to pass. Karen, standing nearby, quickly walked over. "Careful, kids," she said firmly. "Don't hurt yourselves." Just then, Daniel arrived with a small toolbox in hand. "Looks like the tree gave us some work," he said cheerfully. He bent down, moving branches aside and cutting away the smaller ones with care. Karen watched, torn inside. Her first instinct was to give orders, to tell him how to do it. But then she remembered the cleanup day, the smiles of the neighbors, and Daniel's gentle words, "Respect works better when it grows naturally." For the first time, Karen swallowed her pride and bent down beside him. "Let me help," she said quietly. Daniel looked at her in surprise, then gave a small smile. "Thank you. Together we'll be faster." Side by side, they cleared the path. The children clapped when the way was open again. One of them shouted, "Thanks, Mr. Daniel." "Thanks, Miss Karen." Karen froze at the sound of her name. Miss Karen. It had been spoken with joy, not fear. For years, children had avoided her sharp tone. But today, their voices carried gratitude. Something inside her heart softened. Later that evening, Karen sat at her dining table with Aaron. "Do you think people see me differently now?" she asked, her voice unusually quiet. Aaron looked at her with gentle eyes. "I think they see the real you, Mom. Not the one with the clipboard, but the one who helped today." Karen's throat tightened. She had never thought her son noticed the difference, but children always saw more than parents believed. The following week, the day of the school talk arrived. Karen stood outside the building as parents and children gathered inside. She had not been invited, but curiosity had brought her. She stood quietly near the door, watching through the glass as Daniel spoke. He told the children simple stories about service, about helping neighbors without expecting anything in return. His words were not grand, but his honesty filled the room. The children listened, wide-eyed. Teachers nodded approvingly. Karen felt a strange mixture of emotions: envy, admiration, and humility. She realized something important: Daniel wasn't taking her place. He was showing her what real leadership looked like. It wasn't about rules. It was about heart. As the children clapped at the end of his talk, Karen turned and walked slowly home. The evening air was cool, and the lake shimmered under the setting sun. For the first time in a long while, she let herself whisper the truth. I was wrong. Her voice was soft, carried away by the breeze, but it was enough. That night, Karen placed her clipboard in a drawer and closed it. She didn't throw it away, but she no longer felt the need to keep it in sight. For years, it had been her crown. Now, she was ready to learn a new way of being part of the community. As she drifted to sleep, Karen thought about Daniel, the lake, and the children's cheerful voices. Deep in her heart, she knew change was possible if only she was brave enough to accept it. The weeks that followed carried a new rhythm for Lake Pine. The neighborhood no longer felt tense, no longer ruled by strict rules and cold stares. Instead, there was laughter, friendly greetings, and a warmth that spread from house to house. Daniel, steady as always, continued living simply. He jogged, helped neighbors when asked, and spent quiet evenings by the lake. Yet even he noticed the biggest change. Karen was no longer the same. She still walked with her clipboard sometimes, but it was no longer a shield. She spoke with neighbors in softer tones, and though pride still lingered in her heart, it was beginning to melt. One Saturday morning, the HOA gathered again in the community hall. This time, Karen did not stand at the front. She sat among the others, her clipboard resting quietly on her lap. Mrs. Lee looked around the room. We've all been talking, she said warmly, about having a summer festival by the lake. Music, food, games for the kids. Something to bring us all together. The neighbors murmured with excitement. Karen felt her chest tighten. In the past, she would have taken charge immediately, drawing up lists of rules and schedules. But now, she stayed quiet, waiting. Then, to her surprise, Daniel spoke. That sounds wonderful. I think Karen should lead it. She knows this community better than anyone. All eyes turned toward her. Karen blinked, speechless. Daniel had every reason to take the spotlight, but instead, he had offered it to her. Slowly, Karen rose to her feet. Her voice trembled, but she spoke clearly. If you all agree, I'd be honored to help. But I think this time, we should plan it together, as neighbors, not just under my rules. The room filled with gentle applause. For the first time, Karen felt respect that wasn't tied to fear. Over the next few weeks, the preparations began. Families offered to bring food, children painted signs, and music lovers promised to perform. Karen worked beside everyone, not above them. She found herself laughing more, even enjoying small mistakes that once would have annoyed her. Aaron noticed the change. One evening, as they folded streamers for the festival, he smiled. You're different now, Mom. Happier. Karen's eyes softened. Maybe I finally understand what this community really needs. But just as she began to feel settled, a new challenge arrived. 3 days before the festival, dark clouds gathered in the sky. A heavy storm swept through the neighborhood, tearing down decorations and soaking the supplies. The carefully painted signs were ruined, and the tables set aside for food were damaged. The next morning, neighbors gathered by the lake, faces worried. What do we do now? Someone asked. The festival is ruined. Karen looked around at the anxious faces. The old Karen might have panicked, snapping orders and blaming others. But the new Karen took a deep breath and spoke calmly. "We can still do this," she said. "The storm took our decorations, yes, but it didn't take our spirit. If we work together, we can rebuild. Maybe even make it better." The crowd murmured, unsure. That was when Daniel stepped forward. "Karen is right. We can fix this. We just need everyone's hands." Encouraged, the neighbors began again. Children repainted signs with brighter colors. Families brought out spare tables from their garages. Daniel helped lift fallen branches, while Karen directed gently, encouraging instead of commanding. By the end of the day, the lake shore looked alive again, different, but beautiful in its own way. That evening, Karen sat on her porch, tired but smiling. Daniel walked by and stopped. "You did well today," he said. Karen shook her head. "We all did well. But, thank you. A few months ago, I would have shouted and blamed people. Today, I realized how much better it feels to work together." Daniel nodded. "That's real leadership." Karen's eyes grew thoughtful. "I used to think leadership was control. But now, I see its service." The day of the festival arrived with sunshine breaking through the clouds. Families gathered, music played, and the smell of food filled the air. Children ran by the water, their laughter carrying across the lake. Karen stood near the tables, watching the joy around her. A little girl tugged at her dress and handed her a flower. "Thank you, Miss Karen, for making this fun," the child said sweetly. Karen's eyes softened as she took the flower. In that moment, she realized she didn't need fear to earn respect. She only needed kindness. As the sun set and lanterns lit the evening sky, Karen felt something new, a peace she hadn't known in years. She looked across the crowd and saw Daniel smiling, chatting with neighbors, his calm presence steady as ever. For the first time, Karen didn't feel challenged by him. She felt grateful. The festival at Lake Pine had ended with music, laughter, and glowing lanterns across the water. For many, it was only a community gathering. But for Karen, it was something far greater. It was proof that she had changed, and that her neighbors finally saw her with respect, not fear. Still, deep inside, she wondered if this new peace would last. Would people trust her fully? Would she be able to hold on to this new version of herself when the challenges returned? The answer came sooner than she expected. 1 week after the festival, a letter arrived from the county office. The HOA had been selected for a special inspection, a review that could either raise the value of their homes or lower it. The news stirred worry across the neighborhood. Families feared strict penalties if things weren't perfect. The HOA gathered once more in the hall. Nervous voices filled the room. "What if they find something wrong?" one man asked. "They always find neighborhoods for small things," another woman added. "We'll look careless if the place isn't spotless." All eyes turned to Karen. For years, she had been the strict one, the one who enforced every rule. Everyone expected her to step forward with her usual sharp commands. But Karen didn't rush. She thought for a long moment, then spoke gently. "Yes, the inspectors are coming. But this time, let's not focus on fear. Let's show them who we are, not just tidy homes, but a strong community." Her words surprised the neighbors. Instead of dreading the inspection, they began to see it as a chance to shine together. Over the following days, the whole neighborhood worked side by side. Families painted fences, children picked up trash near the lake, and couples trimmed gardens. Daniel quietly helped wherever needed, never asking for attention, but his steady presence reminded everyone to keep calm. Karen walked door to door, not with a clipboard but with encouragement. She carried lemonade for those working in the heat and praised the children for their small but important efforts. The same neighbors who once hid from her now welcomed her into their yards with smiles. Finally, the day of the inspection arrived. Two officials in neat suits walked slowly through the neighborhood, making notes. Neighbors watched nervously from porches, their hands clasped. Karen felt her own heart pound. She wanted so badly for this to go well, not for herself, but for everyone who had trusted her new way. At last, the officials called everyone together by the lake. One of them cleared his throat and spoke. "This neighborhood is well kept," he said. "But what impressed us most wasn't just the appearance. It was the spirit we felt here. People working together, greeting us kindly, and showing pride in their homes. That is rare." The crowd released a collective sigh of relief. Smiles broke out, children clapped, and a wave of joy swept through Lake Pine. Karen's eyes filled with tears she didn't expect. For so long, she had believed order came from fear and control. Now, she saw clearly it came from unity and kindness. That evening, as the sun sank low and painted the lake golden, Daniel found Karen standing by the water. She held a small notebook in her hands. "Making new rules already?" Daniel teased gently. Karen smiled, shaking her head. "No. I'm writing something different. A reminder for myself." She opened the notebook and read softly, "Leadership is not control. Leadership is service." Daniel's eyes warmed. "You've learned what some never do." Karen looked at him, gratitude shining in her face. "And I couldn't have learned it without you. The day I tried to push you out, you could have fought me, embarrassed me, or even left. But you didn't. You stood calm. You showed me another way. That changed me." For a moment, silence stretched between them, filled only by the soft waves against the shore. Then Karen added, "I don't know if I can ever repay you, Daniel." Daniel shook his head. "You already have. This community is better now. That's enough." From the path behind them, voices rose. Neighbors were gathering with food, laughter, and music once again. Children waved to Karen, calling her name happily. She felt her chest swell with a warmth she hadn't known in years. As lanterns were lit again and floated across the lake, Karen whispered to herself, "This is what I always wanted. Not power. Not control. Just belonging." Her son, Aaron, ran up beside her, his face glowing in the lantern light. "Mom," he said proudly, "everyone likes you now. They're not scared anymore." Karen wrapped an arm around him. "I don't want them to be scared, Aaron. I just want to be part of this family we call a community." The boy nodded, and together they walked toward the crowd. Daniel followed quietly, his step steady, his smile calm. That night, Lake Pine shone brighter than ever, not from rules, not from control, but from the shared hearts of neighbors who had finally learned what it meant to live as one. And at the center of it, Karen stood not as the feared HOA enforcer, but as a woman reborn, carrying a badge not of power, but of trust, respect, and kindness.